And then finally, and potentially most important, is organizational culture. Few things here that have mattered. Aligning members of the team. We try to align people during the hiring process even. So I'll share, Chris Murray, my colleague, is a new hire. She started yesterday with Bell. Welcome, Chris. During her hiring process, though, we would share with her, here's our strategic plan. These are our organizational milestones. This is what we're trying to accomplish. So that, she's evaluating us at the same time. She knows what she's signing up for. That I've found over 16 years has been important, because what really sets us back is when a really fantastic, talented person comes on and then says, but I don't really believe in that metric. I don't think that's the right thing to measure. So then we're actually negotiating with them about the utility of a metric, as opposed to, wait, let's play it out, and then you're part of the team now. You can absolutely help inform what we measure and how. But for the moment, you're being asked to execute so we can perform well. And instead, we were negotiating about the merits of stuff. So we actually start aligning people during the hiring process. This is what Bell cares about. This is what Bell's going to be focused on. So hopefully you're on board with that, because we'd like you to be. You can help inform it, improve it over time, but let's be aligned even before you start. So we do that. We, of course, keep making it a part of their onboarding process and their ongoing engagement through their performance reviews. And then just some sub-bullets here. Job descriptions for our line staff. Say, you're going to work with parents, you're going to work with children, you're going to collect data. So it's a part of the job description. And some staff members at Bell have variable compensation packages. So those are really tricky to create, because we want to make sure people are aligned around the organizational performance indicators. So nobody gets a variable comp or bonus if the organization didn't perform. So obviously there's that level of alignment. But also we, for example, will say we want scholars to do really, really well. We want scholars to gain at least 1 month grade equivalent skills. But also you have to have tested enough of your scholars. Okay, so we don't just want, whatever subset you got pre and post data. We also use it to incentivize, really, we need pre and post data from all of your scholars. So we have a complete set of information to make a judgment on. Ensure reliable feedback loops. So we have these meetings that I talked about. They're called lessons learned sessions at Bell. We sometimes call them a postmortem, which is really, really negative. But it's just a way to sort of say, when a program is over, we're going to look at it, we're going to dissect it, we're going to use all the data to say what went on there, good and bad. But the nice way to characterize it is a lessons learned session. We have people with different roles in those sessions. So somebody writes the report and has all the data. Somebody else facilitates the meeting so that we're getting good insights. Nobody feels defensive. We got to make sure nobody feels like, okay, this reading gains weren't there in California. We don't want the California team or the people responsible for supporting them to feel like they're on the defense in that session. So somebody facilitates it really, really well. Somebody's responsible for making sure we capture all the actions and making sure we follow up on it. So different people have roles in that sense. And then our training model every cycle sets the expectation that we will learn. So we have people that have been running our program sites for years, and they'll say, I have training again. Why do I have to keep getting trained? And it's because something changed, something improved. There will be something different in this cycle, whether it's large or small. So we kind of set that expectation through our training. We have had to make choices about building or accessing key capabilities, especially around IT. We have today, and it costs some money, and it took more than that, it took time. But now most things at Bell are cloud-based, including our telephone system, actually. It's a voice over IP system. I'm still learning that, to be honest. We have integration of all of our different systems. We have a recruiting system, a performance management system, a payroll system, for example. Those 3 things are integrated around staffing. We have all the hardware that we need. We have customized dashboards, and we have on-demand tech support. Okay, so this is something we've been able to evolve to. But then I would say one of the biggest contributors, and this will be the sort of last insight I'll provide, has been the organizational core values. So at Bell, we have 5 core values. One of them is excellence, because we're always striving to do excellent work for the children we serve, and we want the children we serve to strive for excellence. But another value is learning. It's literally one of our values, so that it's a way for us to recognize, even if we strive for excellence, we're actually never excellent enough. And what can we do to learn and get better? And that helps set the tone. So in conclusion, as a summary, at Bell, performance management is about asking and answering the questions that optimize our programmatic and also our organizational performance. And while there are questions that will be asked of you as nonprofit EDs or other staff members, these questions are typically quite answerable and they'll yield safe answers. You should ask those. Don't limit yourself to those with your performance management approach. I would encourage you to create a safe space for the most valuable questions, which in my experience have been the ones that only you internally could generate with your team. And answering these questions, I think, would benefit you as the focus of your performance management.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Come this way.
They're going to bring you some water.
Thanks.
So let's give Tiffany another round of applause. That was terrific.
Thank you.
So we're going to, as I said, make this as interactive as possible. But there are a few things that I jotted down that I'm going to start with, and then I'll open it up to folks. I'm hoping I'm able to ask the questions that are already on your mind. I know, where'd you get the money for this, all that stuff. I mean, those are the ones that I anticipate are coming. But there's some basic takeaways that I hope that you got from Tiffany's talk. The whole notion of that they focused on key metrics and drivers. At the same time, they were focused on expectation of their scholars. So sometimes we all get locked into how is the program doing and meeting the needs of the clients we're serving. They didn't lose track of that, but they also made sure they were focused just as well or equally as well on what are the drivers and metrics. So I thought that was a good takeaway. The other is they collect data that would never be seen by outside parties. I thought that was fascinating. How many of us just spend time only collecting the data that people want? So that shows that you really have a learning organization. So I commend them for that. They were very clear at what success looks like. Can you honestly say that you know what success looks like down to the granular level that Tiffany decided? If you don't get anything from this survey or this presentation, I think you got a lot. Her whole discussion on alignment of the performance evaluation and the hiring. Can we honestly look ourselves in the mirror and say that we are evaluating people based on the organizational metrics that we want to achieve? And are our supervisors rewarding that or discouraging that? And if you can, then great, excellent. But if you aren't, then you need to look at that. That's how you build a learning organization. So those are a couple. I have more. They'll come back during the question. But I know at this point we wanted to get some organizational questions. So we're going to do some polling real quick, and then I'm going to open it up to Tiffany. So the first question is, my organization collects data to optimize our organizational performance. Do you agree, strongly agree, somewhat agree? So based on what you just heard, does your organization currently collect data to optimize your organizational performance? Or is it, as Tiffany alluded to, whispering just to satisfy us, the funder? Which is a good answer, by the way.
You have to raise them.
You have to raise them. All right, so most of you agree that, so most of you are collecting data to optimize your organizational performance. Great. The next question. My organization uses the data it collects primarily for the purpose of, and you see the choices there, complying with reporting requirements from funders, learning and growing, holding staff accountable, and we do not actively collect data, or use the data we collect. So here's the interesting thing with A. So if we didn't require you to collect any data as funders, would you collect data? That would be interesting. Okay, next question. We're not doing that, by the way, but it's just a thought. My organization struggles with effectively using data due to. This is where we hope to get some of the interesting questions with Tiffany in this section here. So your answers here would be really important. The number of people wanting to answer this question is dropping down. That's interesting. Oh, there they come. Lack of capacity, lack of funding, internal resistance. We're perfect, and other. Okay. Great. Is there one more, or is that it? That's it? Okay. Great, so thank you. So let me, before we open it up, let me ask just a little bit so people get to know you more. How did you get started on this? Tell us kind of your personal story in relation to running Bell and going down this data management.
Sure. So I have personally been very committed to the achievement gap and low-income children and helping all children excel. And I was recruited to Bell because we work with teachers, like I said, sometimes expensive teachers, but also college students to deliver our programming. So when I was a college student, I responded to a classified ad that said, "Do you believe all children can excel?" And there was a telephone number. This was like I was looking for a summer job. It said, "Do you believe all children can excel?" And there was a telephone number. And that's all it said. And I did believe it, and I called, and I found out about Bell, and I started with Bell summer of 1998, and I've been involved ever since. And part of what happened was I was studying psychology as an undergrad, so I'd learned some research methods and the value of sort of collecting data across large samples and using that to sort of learn about behavior and different things you learn when you're studying psychology. So I thought it was a fascinating field, but I mostly just wanted to serve kids and help children excel. So when I started at Bell, I wasn't sure exactly which path I would take, but I was asked to do program evaluation. So I was so in the year 2000, I was asked to start measuring program outcomes. Use what you learned in your psychology bachelor's degree to collect some data about how Bell's doing with programs. And that's how we started. I was a novice. I developed surveys to start, and then we started using just curriculum assessments that existed with the curriculum materials, and we would just go out. I would go out and really advocate with the program staff. Can you please collect this data? Some of them would say, no, I don't have time, and I was like 20 or whatever, and they were like, no, I'm not going to do it. And I'd say, please, and I'd build relationships with people. Can you please collect this data? So in the beginning, it was a lot of pleading and advocacy and me developing, homemade surveys. But it was a start. It started giving us data and insights that people were interested in, and they were like, oh, this is interesting. This is fascinating. I didn't think that was true. And then also people started learning, our program is actually moving the needle on academic achievement, and isn't that interesting? And so then we did start telling that story to our funders, and that helped us actually get more funding. So then there was a little bit more organizational interest in collecting that kind of data. So we just got started on a shoestring budget by investing in one FTE, which was me, and then letting it snowball from there. And I wasn't an expert at that time, but I wanted to get better at it, so I started going to professional development sessions, which do exist across the sector on program evaluation. And so I went to a couple, and at one of them I met some people that had like master's degrees in program evaluation, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, I'll do that, just so I can get better at this. And before I knew it, that turned into a Ph.D. program, and it took me 6 years to do that. I was working full-time at Bell, but I got my Ph.D. in 6 years in research, measurement, and evaluation. So it was a lot of statistics classes. I really enjoyed them. Don't do this if you don't enjoy statistics. I enjoyed stat classes. And truth be told, now as CEO, I don't analyze data sets, so I don't really utilize the training I gained, but I have perspective now that's quite useful, I think, in terms of research and asking questions and what data might tell us. So.
Great. And then the other question I'm anticipating people want to ask, and then we'll throw it open and get questions from the audience, is where did the money come from? How did, we're sitting here as organizations, the number one question is, where did you get the resources? Did Bell have it internally? Did you find an angel funder? What enabled you to do this?
Sure, so there are probably a couple of answers. I would say initial efforts to just collect the data and to fund an FTE and to create surveys and all that, we just did a ton of stuff manually to avoid costs, and we just baked it into the program budget. It is a program feature, it's a program function. It was a part of the cost per scholar of serving a child, and we passed that on to funders as part of the budget. We had a program evaluation line item as one of the line items, and we passed it along. That's the cost of serving kids. To make bigger, more significant investments, I would say we did benefit from some capacity building funders that were interested in not direct operating costs, but the type of capacity building and could provide the dollars to build out an IT infrastructure. So we couldn't do these things manually forever. I used to data entry survey responses, sit there for days and enter the survey responses and the test scores from lots and lots of scholars and parents and teachers, and we were collecting a lot of data. But eventually that wasn't going to get us the data quickly, it wasn't going to be scalable. So we had to invest in IT eventually, and really we had to find an extraordinary funding partner that was willing to allow us to build that capacity, because that's not so easily just put into a line item and passed on to funders. In fact, it's strange, I think a few years ago, or a decade ago in our sector, sort of seeing program evaluation, funders didn't really want to take on that. I think there's a lot more of an appetite for that. But IT now is the new thing where there's like a technology line item, and it's like, what's this expense or what's this about? And we're not using robots or droids or something. These are real costs of running a program at scale with quality, and we had to find a partner that was willing to invest in that. And then the couple of times where we've done independent randomized controlled trial studies, I will tell you that's sort of at the far extreme of the journey.
Right.
When you get there, those have cost a lot of money. Our first RCT study cost almost $1 million, and our second cost almost $3 million. So they are very expensive, and that is not something we put into a line item for sure. We get dedicated funding. We don't do those studies unless we have a funding source. And so the first time it took 2 funders that covered the $1 million, and the second time there was essentially a social innovation fund grant and some matching foundation dollars to pay for that. But we wouldn't otherwise sort of say we're going to trade off operating dollars to do a $3 million study.
Okay. All right. Let's open it up for a few minutes and get some questions for the audience. Any hands? Yeah, I think they'll be on our website afterwards, yes. Yes. And you have to project so everyone can hear you. Oh, there's mics coming around. Great.
No.
Okay. So one of the things that you said in your presentation, which I paid close attention to, is that you refer to your students as scholars. In the evolution of your organization, has that always been there, or at some point was that intentional to kind of set the projection of the organizational expectation? Instead of calling them students, you call them scholars?
We've always called them scholars since we started. It's a really important part of how we set high expectations for them. We say, good morning scholars to them when we see them in the morning in the summer. We say good afternoon scholars. It's really fun and fascinating too, because we work in schools. Almost, I would say 99% of our programs are actually at school sites. And at the end of a school day, when the principal is on dismissing the different groups of students, she'll say, the walkers can leave now. And then she'll say, students taking bus A, and then she'll start, the Bell scholars can go to the cafeteria now. Scholars taking bus B, scholars taking bus, so she'll start calling them all scholars, which is great. And so, yeah, we think it's an important part of setting the expectations.
Okay. Question on this side? We'll go back and forth, yeah.
One of the biggest problems our organization has is getting the money to get the real-time data that you use so well. I mean, we really could use that. It would make a huge difference to what we do, but we haven't been able to raise the funds for it. Any suggestions?
I would say Some of the things we initially used that we eventually then had more resources to do, for example, we used to use like an optical mark scanning software, so we could scan the data and it would record the survey responses into a database. So that feels really old school now, and I don't know if they still sell them, but maybe. But it was a scanner, maybe cost a couple $100, and we had a database that with SPSS, which is a statistical software, that probably cost a couple $100 when we bought it. But then we could scan all the surveys through the scanner, and then it would populate the database. And so it was like the best $400 spent from my perspective, because I used to manually enter all the responses before we had it, but that was a step. Today now we've invested in Salesforce. You'll have critical choices about building or buying something, and for us, we've found it beneficial to have some really talented IT human resources on our team that can continuously build things to meet our needs than outsourcing that all the time. So we've sort of felt like that's been an investment that's benefited us.
Okay. This side?
Yes. Hi.
Good.
Okay, thank you. I'm Rosemary Kamei with Building Futures Now in East Palo Alto, and I'm very interested in the Salesforce side of it. How did you figure out, Salesforce is very good in terms of its capacity and what it could do, and every nonprofit here can apply for the licensing. How did you figure out, with all of the apps that are available for it, to use which one?
Yep. So we started by using Salesforce for fundraising, of course. Okay, so we used that for a long time. But then we had this database, a separate database for our scholar records that was not meeting our needs, because over time we were sort of, we were like creating, what was it, Microsoft, what was it called? Pro? No, the Pro. FileMaker Pro. Does that still exist? Okay. I don't know, but we used to use FileMaker Pro. But every year we wouldn't know, did these scholars do the program last year even, as we were growing. And it was funny because I actually knew all the scholars by name because I was entering all these test scores and stuff. So I'd be like, oh, this is this Miguel, and that's that Miguel, and this Miguel from that site. I literally knew them all. But then, we were starting to get bigger, but the database records weren't talking to each other. It wasn't a relational database. So we actually asked the funder. We said, who in your portfolio, and so even where your funders might not give you cash for something, actually connecting you to other nonprofits that have the same problem was helpful to us early. So we would say, who in your portfolio is doing a better job with a relational database for the scholar records? And it was through that question that we got connected to a bunch of nonprofits, and we learned that Salesforce could do that for us. And so now all of our scholar records are housed in Salesforce. All of our tutor records start someplace else, but it gets integrated into Salesforce. And quite honestly, we had to, those first couple of years, use a consultant to help us figure out how to do that. And then in more recent years, we have IT staff that have that kind of capability, and then they come out to Salesforce training and Dreamforce training and all that stuff to get better at it.
Okay, great. This side?
In terms of fundraising, social media sites, and if so, have they been successful for you instead of going out to those big funders like we're all chasing in this room here to support our, to sustain our nonprofit?
Yeah, I have not used social media to fundraise.
Okay. Questions over here?
So you had stated that one of your goals was increasing parents' engagement in their students' education. So I'm just curious how you go about measuring that.
So we've tried a couple things. We've measured how many show up at events. So when we host events at school sites, when we host events in a region, we measure how many are showing up. And that's one indicator for us. We've surveyed the parents at the end of the program. We consistently do this, and we ask them, to what extent do you feel more knowledgeable about what your child's strengths and weaknesses are? To what extent do you feel more willing to ask your child's school year teacher questions? To what degree did Bell help with that? So it's in large part through surveys, but measuring who shows up at events, that was actually really instructive too.
Is there a question?
I guess along those lines, Christina with Breakthrough Silicon Valley, some data is a little bit, I guess, more difficult because it's intangible, so we're really focusing on growth mindset. So I can say, Miguel, he's so determined, he's a risk taker, because he raises his hand in class or does certain things, but then we struggle with how do we present that data? How do we collect that? And if you have any insight into that, that'd be great.
I don't yet, but that's one of our program innovations, is to shift especially at the middle school level, or to begin with at the middle school level, toward more of a growth mindset approach with our programming and then with our outcome measurement. So we have, I told you these volunteer leadership boards are really critical. We just formed a middle school advisory board that is specifically helping us think about growth mindset and measurement. So I'm happy to stay in touch with you as that work evolves, because we absolutely want to measure new and different outcomes related to that. That's great. I mean, for sure, Bell is still in the journey. There are things we think we do well and we're pleased with, and then there are things we need to do better all the time. We think we're undertelling the story of impact with scholars, and that's why we're exploring this growth mindset, because it doesn't all show up in an achievement test. We've also had funders and external parties tell us we're too data-driven and we're too metrics-oriented. You know, I've had a funder say, you know, Tiffany, it wouldn't hurt to just tell a story about a child. Yeah. Sometimes we want to hear an anecdote, like, are there real kids behind the numbers? Exactly. And I had to, like, remember to do that sometimes.
Okay. Question over?
Hi, I'm sorry if I missed this, but I know you started in 1998. I'm curious when your organization started, how large your budget is now, and how many people you employ within those communities that you're at.
Sure. So we started in 1992. We, at that time, like our founder, he'd tell you in his stories, if you ever hear from him, that he made like $12,000 a year, and all the rest of the people volunteered, and his parents were really annoyed with him because he had gone to Yale and Harvard Law School, and they had paid a lot of money for that. And so, but anyway, now we have, and this year, an operating budget of about $24 million. We have about 75 full-time employees, and we employ about 1,500 part-time teachers and tutors.
Talk a little bit about what you really emphasized was the learning within the organizations, different people focusing on different things. Can you tell a little bit more about how every staff, I assume I can go up to any Bell staff and they'll understand what the goals are, what the metrics are. Talk a little bit about how you did that. How does that transition occur? Yeah,
we, through these all-staff webinars, that first of all helps, because without that alignment, you know, we learn a lot through our mistakes. Like every time something wasn't right, it allowed us to make a leap forward in terms of how we did things. But for example, we'd have our staff, the program staff, the one that run the programs, ask, you know, why are we trying to grow? Like, why is it important that we grow? Like I'd deliver an all-staff webinar and I'd say, we had this growth goal and we didn't achieve it. And that's not going to be good for us for these reasons. And they would say, well, why was that even important? Why do we have to grow? You know, I have 200 scholars I'm serving at this school, and you know, I'd actually like to serve more kids at this school, not open a new site or not go to a new region. And there was a lot of confusion among our staff about why Bell was making choices it was making. So you can imagine how that doesn't serve us when people are not bought in, they don't understand it, certainly they're not committed to achieving it. And it took a while, but I do think this onboarding process is really key, and it has to be extensive, and there's, you know, what you need to do your job, but then there's what you need to know about the whole organization, and I think it's easy to skip that sometimes. You know, what does this new hire need to know about the whole organization? So that was one, the onboarding. The constant communication, we don't do this perfectly. We do 4 all-staff webinars. We have what we call leadership calls, where we have director-level people together every 6 weeks. We actually, this will be funny, we have this communications matrix where we develop this matrix, because then we were like, we don't communicate enough, so how should we fix it? So we developed this matrix around, and we read this book, all of us together, and we learned from it. It was called Death by Meetings.
Yes. Yeah.
And in that they have these practical suggestions around having huddles and tactical meetings and strategy meetings. And so we developed this matrix around who needs to be in which tactical meetings and which strategy meetings and which huddles. And so we just make sure there are a lot of those happening, but we're not, you know, giving people death by meetings. So we had to be thoughtful about it and spend time on it.
Great. Question over here.
I just want to thank you. This is a fantastic workshop, and leaves me really hungry. And I couldn't see who the person was that asked the question about Salesforce, But I'm really wondering, Rick, if this might be something that the foundation could do. We're currently looking at making a transition from Blackbaud, that's very difficult to work with, to Salesforce. And I'm wondering if there are other groups in the room that are struggling with the same issue, and if the foundation could even gather some expertise or even get us together so we can wrestle intelligently among us with that issue and that question, because I'm challenged. I'm delighted with the way you're collecting data and the way you turn it into management information and set real performance standards for your organization. And I think that would be wonderful. I'm thirsty for that. Thank you.
That's a great idea. We will look into that. That's great. And I saw a couple, oh, right here.
I can anyway.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Matt Huerta with Neighborhood Housing Services Silicon Valley. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is what kind of financial metrics, as far as your organizational health, do you track? Two things come to mind. I mean, do you charge, are there any fees for service? And as a percentage of your overall budget, is that something you track? And number two, as with respect to your reserve, I mean, $24 million budget, it's a huge number to get a hold of every year. What does your reserve look like, and have you had that for a while?
Okay, so we have a fee-for-service model in that we charge schools and districts a portion of the cost, but never families. So it's free for the families. Our model is a public-private model. We have what we call a model market, which says how ideally revenues will come together to support the cost of the program from public sources and private sources. So the fee part of it would be for the district or the school. So we have that model, and that is one of the metrics we track. So at Bell, because we're a national organization, we look at each region's performance against the model market. So what % of their costs are they covering versus the milestone we set for them that year. It's fairly data intensive because not all, the expenses track, if you're looking at your finances, the expenses track one way, the revenue tracks another way. You hope it's going to cover cash needs, but it doesn't always. For us, it does because it rolls up into one org. But in other words, on a quarterly basis, you may or may not look like you're on track, but we've had to figure out what does that mean for the end of the year. If, for example, all the revenue comes in the fourth quarter. And there are a lot of instances for Bell where the revenue does come in the fourth quarter. So to answer your next question, we do have a cash reserve that we use to finance our programming needs to a degree. It's been built to about $5 million. That was hard to do for us. For most years, we started working on building a cash reserve in 2007, and it took about 5 years to get it to $5 million, but that's because we had a campaign, an actual fundraising campaign for it, so we had investors willing to do that. It's otherwise it's of course just really hard to generate a surplus that's going to add up over time quickly. But the other thing, because we had the financial discipline built over time, like once we stopped being over budget by $1 million on one line in one quarter, we were able to attract interest from the banks, and we were able to secure a line of credit, and that also helps meet our financing needs. So the combination of those two, we have access to $12 million in cash.
Okay. We'll do a couple more. I know there's one over here.
Hi, my name is Tammy Cardenas. I'm with Second Harvest Food Bank and really enjoyed your talk today. I had so many questions, but I'll just narrow down to two. The first is, I'm really impressed by the data-driven culture that you've built at your organization, and I'm curious about how or if that has migrated into your marketing and development organization. And then my second question is really related to, obviously you have a lot of background in research and data collection and data evaluation yourself, but how would you advise us or others to recruit talent in? What types of things would you look for that kind of background? And is that at the leadership? Obviously there's alignment throughout the whole organization, but in terms of recruitment and talent recruitment, what would you look for?
Sure. Great questions. I would say a data orientation is valuable at Bell. You don't have to be a measurement expert because that's, I'm probably the only person that's come through Bell in 20 years that wanted to study statistics over and over again. So there aren't going to be, measurement experts for sure coming into some of the roles that we want to fill in our organizations, but being data-oriented is something I think you can test for and should. And we do that in a lot of roles, especially leadership roles. And everybody on the development team has to be data-oriented. You know, I struggled with this as a leader. I became CEO 6.5 years ago, but my background was measurement and program stuff, and I wasn't a fundraiser by background. And so as I learned fundraising, you know, there's a science and there's an art to it. And, you know, when I thought about recruiting and hiring chief development officers or development directors, you know, where did I want the balance to be? Did I want somebody more on the art side or the science side? At Bell, I've found you have to have that science down. It's managing a sales process, it's managing a pipeline, it's managing a process in lots of ways. Of course, you have to be a good relationship manager and you have to understand what people are looking for, but in some roles, in other words, I do think being especially data-oriented is important. At Bell, if you're a development officer and you don't feel comfortable using Salesforce.com, you're going to ruin us. And you cannot stay on the team. Because if you're not updating your Salesforce records, that creates problems for us. And that's not okay. So there are some roles where it's, you know, you gotta participate in this with us because it rolls up and it matters. And then there are other ones where I think just a data orientation is an important part of the leadership. Because if you're not at least data oriented, you won't use the data. You'll just sort of get it and you'll make up reasons in your mind why those things are true and you'll sort of move on. But if you're at least a little data oriented, you'll believe there's something here that's telling me this and I'd like to know more about this other thing. And so that we think is important, but not necessarily expertise. I would say if I didn't have a measurement background, and even though I do, the evaluation advisory board that we built has been valuable. So we recruited, and I was really astonished, we recruited a bunch of experts in evaluation and measurement and invited them to be on this board, and they said yes. And you know, unlike when you're building your actual governing board, where you have to do quite a bit of cultivation on the front end before somebody valuable would agree to do it, these evaluators were like, sure. And some of them have been on our board for 10 years, on our evaluation advisory board for 10 years. So there is a community of evaluators and researchers that are willing to help out and will lend a lot.
And last question.
Tessa Solomon from Peninsula Family Service. We have been implementing performance management in our organization for the past couple of years, and one of the challenges we face is the staff feeling like it's a personal judgment on their performance. And how do you get around that issue and not making them feel that?
Yeah, that's really hard. I'll tell you honestly, that's really hard. We talk about it as a leadership team as the balance between a blame frame and a learning frame. We have to be really careful that the data won't be used to blame somebody for something that went wrong, but instead we're going to learn about what happened. And even, you know, we joke, we call it a post-mortem because it's like, ha ha ha, we're all in this autopsy together or whatever it is. You know, so we do that, but it is a tough balance because ultimately you do have to hold people accountable for achieving the performance. What we make always clear, especially when we do, for example, 360 performance evaluations, that data will never be used to fire somebody. So that's just true. It just won't be used to fire somebody. If there's something related to the data that is important, you'll be coached around that. You might transition out for another reason, but we make it clear that data won't be used to fire people. And in fact, there's so much swooping in to help that people actually see value in being able to raise a flag and say, I have this problem or I'm off track, because you'll get help with it. So we actually incentivize sort of being honest and transparent about being off track. But it's not a balance that we have perfectly at Bell. I would say we need to do a little bit more on the accountability side, to be honest, because people do know that, you know, the data won't be used to fire them. But it's tough. There was something else I was going to say. I wonder if I can add any more about that. No, I would just say think about, you know, also where ultimately the performance problem sort of lies, because it's often not an individual failing anyway. It's a system or an approach. So just be careful that you double click on what your data says enough that you really see it's typically not about a single person.
Okay, great. I know, yeah.
Sorry to extend this, I'll be very quick. So I'm Mary Beth Nacy from Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits, and I just wanted to follow up on the Salesforce question and getting folks together. Brian, are you still in the room? Mm-hmm. There he is, okay. Brian is our hands-on tech manager for SVCN and is running and has run several workshops around Salesforce, how to use it, what the data is, how to use it for outcomes, and did a very popular one back in November. So we could have a conversation about potentially doing that again for folks that are here, because it sounds like it's something that would be really valuable. So look for something to come out from us, and Brian and I can get together on that. So,
that's great.
Thank you.
And while you have the mic, do you want to talk about your upcoming events?
Oh, thank you. So thank you so much, Tiffany. This was a great presentation. And we really appreciate the opportunity to co-sponsor today with this session. And Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits, we're developing our own professional development curriculum for all of you. And we've had a couple of workshops so far, but we're having a large fundraising summit. It's listed on the flyers on March 17th, and registration is open, and we have some wonderful, wonderful speakers. Some are in the room today. Mohammed Chandri is here. So please register. We'd love to see you there. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Are we going to do the performance or not? We'll just send them out. So we had other organizational questions. We'll send them out to you if you can respond to those. That helps us continue to build these, learn more about you. The one thing I wanted to share with you, though, kind of as a challenge, but more just a provocative thought, and you've heard me talk about it over the 2 years that I've been here. Many of you, a lot of you are in our GOS program, and that program itself is a gift. I mean, one of the reasons I came to the foundation was I was just stunned by the fact that they give out these 2-year general operating support grants to large numbers of organizations that have an automatic, increase built in them, and the only requirement is that you raise a match. So hearing what Tiffany has just talked about, and I know a lot of those are just about using that money to keep the doors open. I understand that. I know the reality of life, and I appreciate that. But what if you could? What if you could take a portion of the match or a portion of the grant and set it aside to start some of the stuff that Tiffany's talking about? That's the kind of innovation you need to do. We are, and the foundation are endeavoring and working as hard as we can to bring more money into this valley. We are only going to be able to do that when we can show that our nonprofits here are using results and are impact driven and understand their metrics. And a lot of from the outside perspective, that is not happening. And so they don't see us as walking the talk in terms of metrics, and they actually get surprised because they believe that we all should be doing it because we're in Silicon Valley. So we've got to step up our game. And so one of the things I would really urge you to think about if you are in that program is to think about carving some of that money aside. I know Kavitha is here who oversees that for us, and she's going to be looking at the impacts that you're doing in that program. But this is another thing. I think Tiffany has given a kind of a roadmap, and if you're in that program, the money's there to carve a little bit of that out and do something with that. So with that, I want to thank you again. This has been outstanding. Thank you. I can't clap. Oh, that wasn't good. And thank you all for coming. This is a great turnout. We're going to have more of them. I want to thank Mara again for setting these up, working with Alexa to do these. If you have ideas, please let us know. We want to do these right. We want to make them impactful for you. So don't be shy, and we look forward to seeing you next time.